for a long time, we thought creatine was just for people who lifted weights, and we've clearly shown now that creatine has beneficial effects for and not just muscle, but we can talk about bone, brain, and some of the really popular things out there. The more creatine in the brain can actually function at a higher level, and or during times of sleep deprivation, hypoxia, jet lag, depression, clinical anxiety. Maybe it's coming to the rescue.
Dr. Darren, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you. And, creatine is one of the most researched supplements of all time. And you've done like a lot of research and studies on creatine. So you're pretty much one of the best people to talk to when it comes to creatine. So yeah, I'm excited to have you on the show and discuss all things creatine.
Yeah, happy to be here. There's lots to talk about, so I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah, so maybe we can start with, I said creatine is one of the most studied supplements of all time. What is like the actual, do you have like any number of like how many clinical trials are there on creatine, and what is the kind of the pulse on creatine of what are like the major effects people see?
Yeah. Yeah. The last tally was over 1,000 peer refereed studies, and that includes rodent animal models all the way up to the humans. And it's really exploded since the late 1990s, just looking at young males in the gym. And it's really looking at basically anybody on the planet from across the lifespan, females, older adults. We're actually looking at clinical populations. And so today it'll be exciting to look at not just muscle, but we can talk about bone, brain, and some of the really popular things out there. We could even talk about pregnancy and some of the new emerging areas of that, so it's really exciting, yeah.
Mm, right. So yeah, you mentioned brain, muscles, bones. There's
Yeah.
some aspects of like sleep
Yep.
architecture as well.
Yeah.
So what is why is it like sounds like a miracle molecule? So
Yeah.
like why is what does creatine do to your body when you ingest it?
Yeah, like, it was discovered in the 1800s, and, of course, we all remember back to our own high school biology or physiology that creatine is sorta helps maintain ATP, so adenosine triphosphate, or the energy currency of all our cells, and keep in mind, a lot of people think just muscle, but no, all our cells in bone and brain use ATP, for, existence and longevity, and sure enough, when you look at all this emerging data, there's a common denominator that creatine either through supplementation or through the diet or how we naturally produce it in the body. It seems to maintain ATP levels longer when we're doing activities of daily living or, more importantly, exercise. So that might allow the person to exercise at a higher volume, and we think that's one of the main driving forces. But yeah, as you point out, in the last probably 20 or 30 years, now we're starting to have some beneficial effects on bone density for clinical populations, and from the neck up, it's really emerged. We're now talking about depression, anxiety, sleep. We just published a paper last year on getting a little bit more sleep. What about those susceptible to head trauma, athletes, concussion? So there's a lot of emerging areas. And I think the neck up is probably the biggest area we'll focus on, probably for the next 20 or 30 years. So, yeah, it's gone from just young males getting bigger, stronger, faster to probably having a global effort. I think the last estimate was about 35 million people on the planet take creatine supplementation, and it's projected to be 350 million in 10 years. So I think with all the evidence-based research there, and of course the safety profile is second to none. That's why a lot of people are having this new emerging interest in creatine.
Mm, yeah. So you mentioned that it helps with ATP production,
Right.
creatine, and uh, and you're like all the cells require ATP. So your muscles contain some creatine,
Mhm.
right? And
Yeah.
with the higher the creatine stores in the muscles, then you have availability to recycle the ATP more efficiently or for
Yeah.
longer.
Yeah, and I
And
think your viewers would be more familiar with creatine and muscle or exercise
right,
performance, and yeah, maintaining ATP or energy of the cell is one of the biggest mechanisms. So the athlete or the individual can maybe do more repetitions, lift a little bit more. Also, recovery is a big thing between subsequent workouts. But then when you go inside the cell, creatine does seem to work from a sort of multifactorial way. It actually has been shown to increase things called satellite cells or growth factors, and a lot of your listeners would like, oh, wow, these are really important for contributing to protein synthesis. It also reduces things called reactive oxidative species or inflammation. So now we're starting to see evidence that creatine not only is anabolic, but also has anti-catabolic or anti-inflammatory properties. And that's why we're now bringing in the endurance athletes. For a long time, we thought creatine was just for people who lifted weights, and we've clearly shown now that creatine has beneficial effects for improving recovery after aerobic exercise. So soccer, tennis, Ironman, triathlon, that has beneficial effects there. So there's a lot of cellular aspects, but one of the main driving forces, it allows the person to do more work, whatever that is, training in the gym, whichever, and therefore over time the adaptations can improve. From right off the top of my head, you get an increase of about 1.4 kilograms of lean body mass with creatine, so about 700 grams of muscle. But the biggest and most robust area of evidence is improvement in muscle performance. So, for those that are taking creatine and exercising, you should expect an increase in muscle strength and/or endurance and power. And those are the big ones that's from a muscle perspective come to mind.
Gotcha. Yeah. So supplementing creatine increases this creatine stores in the muscles that allows this to
Right.
happen.
Yeah.
What is like limiting
Mhm.
not doing it without supplements? Like, is it not getting enough from diet, or the body not producing enough of it, or what is the kind of bottleneck?
Yeah, that's an excellent point. So the average omnivore who's consuming, a balanced diet has about 80% of their muscles full of creatine naturally. So supplementation can bring it up by maybe 20 to 30 more percent to about 100%. But those emphasizing a vegan, vegetarian, or plant-based diet, they have substantially lower amounts in their muscle. So when they take creatine supplementation, they bring those levels up again. So the people who respond the best are vegans by far. Those who respond the least or not at all are those on a carnivore diet. They're
Right.
eating an enormous amount of meat per day, and creatine, unfortunately, is only found in animal flesh. So that's going to be red meat or seafood primarily. Poultry has a little bit, but not as much highest concentrations of those. So if you're eating red meat and seafood on a daily basis and you take creatine supplementation, you may actually not notice any significant effects, and they would fall into the non-responder category. Whereas the studies that have looked at vegans, picture your muscles only half full of creatine, and then you take a supplement, they sort of double the capacity. They really improve from a muscle biopsy or perspective. So there are non-responders, but those are typically those that have been born with a high amount in the body. That are eating a lot of red meat or other some modalities affecting it, but vegans really do respond.
Mm, right. And what are like usual dosages that people
Yeah.
would use to fully saturate the muscles?
Yeah. So the most rapid way is what we call the loading phase, and it's probably the most rapid, viable way to fully saturate your muscle quickly. That's about 20 grams of creatine monohydrate a day for about 5 to 7 days. In actual fact, you only need that to do that for about 2 to 3 days, and then we think your muscles are full.
Mm,
And that is really exceptional way to saturate your muscle and get the benefits out of that. A little bit of caution though for those that are listening, if you do the loading phase, that's where two things can creep in. One is a little bit of GI tract stress or irritation because you're taking so much. The reason being is creatine is osmotic, so it likes to take water from the GI tract with it, and so that can cause a little bit of GI issues. The other thing is with the water retention that you typically get with high dose creatine, the number on the scale in the first week may go up a little bit. So a lot of individuals, primarily young females, don't like that. You do not need to do the loading phase. Again, I want to repeat that. You do not need to. You can take as little as 3 grams a day, and that'll saturate your muscle in about a month. So a little bit more patience. We use a relative dose, about 0.1 gram per kilogram. So if you're 70 kilograms, that's 7 grams a day. If you're 100 kilograms, like a football player, that's 10 grams a day. But the average daily dose, 3 to 5 grams, is a very viable amount for muscle benefits. However, we don't think that's enough for bone and brain benefits. So I think a lot of people have heard of this 3 to 5 grams a day. That's probably a very viable amount for skeletal muscle. 95% of your creatine is in your muscle. But if you're saying, hey, I've heard about bone and brain, is 5 grams enough? I personally don't think so. I think we need to do a little bit higher dose. Yeah.
mm. Yeah, gotcha. Yeah, it depends a lot on the body weight and how much
That's
muscle you
correct.
have.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I did also like the loading phase a few weeks ago or a month ago, where I took 28 grams. I did it for
Yes.
actually another reason. I did it for the sleep deprivation effect. So
Yeah.
there was a study that 0.35 grams per kilogram, which for me
Yes.
is 28 grams, that was seen to improve cognition under sleep
Yeah.
deprivation.
Yeah.
And I did notice some benefits for that. And, with that protocol, it apparently like saturated my muscle creatine stores as well. So I can reduce my dose and go back to like
Yeah. Like,
7, 8 grams for me.
yeah, and that's Ali's study from Germany, very elegant, they use MRS, so it was very cool that 28 grams a day would be way higher than what you need, but in their study, the nice thing is after 21 hours of sleep deprivation, you actually were able to have a greater capacity for memory and cognition, so it all that study clearly showed is that creatine can accumulate into the brain with 1 mega dose. We
Mm.
don't know if that's a sustainable amount, but if you knew you had to stay up for 48 hours, I think of an emergency doctor or something, a night shift worker, and memory and cognition are coming to mind. It clearly shows creatine has the capability to influence brain bioenergetics. And I think that's why we have a lot of good data coming out on sleep deprivation or hypoxia or other types of things with sleep and or memory, where creatine is used in the brain just like our muscle. And sometimes when our brain is really stressed, it relies on supplementation. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good tip. So like if you're jet lagged, sleep deprived,
Yes.
or something like that.
Yeah, and I use
Um,
that for university students, final exams, staying up
mm,
all night. If you're flying from, North America to Europe, overnight flight, you're jet lagged, going all the way to South Africa, whatever it is, it seems to have that potential to at least get rid of some of the cognitive or impairments. And we never thought of that before until new emerging data, especially using MRS, which is basically an MRI for the brain, to show that creatine can accumulate. It's really slow. The brain is stubborn compared to muscle. We can probably talk about the differences there, but why I think a higher dose might be more viable from a total daily body perspective. Yeah.
This episode is brought to you by Bond Charge, my favorite company for blue blocking glasses, red light therapy devices, and red light bulbs. These items are essential for keeping your sleep-wakefulness cycles aligned in a world that tries to mess them up. Instead of looking at your phone before bed and letting the blue light disrupt your melatonin production, why not wear blue blockers instead that prevent that from happening? Instead of having your bedroom lit up with bright lights, use the more sleep-friendly alternative by opting for flicker-free red light bulbs that don't disrupt your sleep. Bond Charge also has amazing infrared sauna blankets that can give you the same health benefits as the traditional sauna. You also get the unique benefits of infrared light that improves joint and skin health. Head over to bondcharge.com/Siimland and use the code SIIM, SIIM, for a 15% discount.
I want to start with still the muscle component because that's what people usually associate creatine
Yes.
with. And yeah, bodybuilders have been taking creatine for
Mhm.
decades to build muscle. What is the like research about creatine? And let's keep it in the like muscle and strength realm
Yeah.
right now. So muscle strength, power, kind of this anaerobic performance. What does it say
Yeah.
there?
Yeah, so the vast majority supports a very favorable effect. So anybody engaged in weightlifting or anaerobic or high intensity sporting events usually benefit from creatine in combination with exercise training. And there's about 5 main areas that you should expect. So obviously, if you're performing weightlifting as part of your exercise program and taking creatine as little as 3 grams all the way up to a little bit more, you should get an increase in lean body mass and or muscle size. So that is fantastic for aging and or obviously for exercise performance. The big areas around muscle performance, strength, endurance, and power have also been shown to go up, and also functionality. So we talk about agility, balance, moving quickly for the athletes. So those are all the areas from a muscle performance perspective. The area that doesn't get enough love, so to speak, is the recovery aspect. So creatine seems to reduce markers of inflammation. It's been shown in males to reduce protein breakdown or markers of protein breakdown. So that might allow the athlete who's training twice a day or every day to get into the gym or wherever it is and still train at the same intensity. So it has a lot of anabolic or promoting effects, but the anti-catabolic or anti-inflammatory ones definitely need to be considered as well. Yeah.
Mm, that's interesting. How much muscle are we talking about? Like, how much can you expect to build?
Yeah, so the problem with lean body mass, it looks at muscles a component, but it also has organs, blood, plasma. So we think half of the increase in lean body mass is pure muscle. So for example, most meta-analysis suggests 1.4 kilograms of lean body mass greater with creatine. in combination with a weight training. So at the end of it, if you say 700 grams, I think most people would buy that. We've also
Right.
shown really small increases in limb muscle thickness. I think, though, that I would look at muscle mass as a secondary benefit of creatine, where creatine is only essentially a combination of non essential and one essential amino acid. It does not increase the rates of muscle protein synthesis like essential amino acids do. So it's likely one of the limiting factors. But since it really improves high energy phosphate metabolism, that's why the most robust evidence is, hey, I'm looking to improve muscle performance. I think creatine would be right up there with caffeine from a muscle performance perspective. When you look at the data, creatine is a little bit superior there.
Mm. Yeah, that's interesting. Uh, and I would imagine that you still need to do resistance training. Like, are you gonna build
Right.
muscle even if you
Right.
don't lift?
Yeah. So we just published a study a few months ago clearly showing that creatine by itself will increase water retention and improve lean body mass. But please note, for those that are taking creatine without exercise, it's primarily water.
Right.
You have to perform resistance training to get the muscle accretion or growth effects. There's been a handful of studies showing that you can still get muscle performance benefits without exercise, but to unlock the totality of that, exercise is foundational, and 99% of the studies clearly show that weight training is the most effective modality. Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah. So, ideally, you want to do lifting and consume the creatine while you're doing the resistance training in those phases.
Yeah. And that brings up a really important point. I get asked, does the timing matter? The timing of caffeine matters because it
Mm.
peaks in your blood. But for those that are weightlifting, this is really important and kind of cool that you can take creatine at any time of the day. We don't think there's actually benefits to when you take it. However, in 1992, the seminal study clearly showed that muscle contractions open the doorways to allow creatine in. So I'm a big proponent of taking some of your creatine on a daily basis, either before, during, or after exercise. I think around the exercise training session is a great time to do that. So I say in proximal or proximity to exercise. But if you say, hey, Darren, I can only take my creatine in the morning or at night, it still needs to accumulate. You will get the benefits. So
Mm.
the luxury is take creatine whenever it's consistent for you. I think if you're taking more than 5 grams, try to take some in close proximity to exercise.
Gotcha. And is the difference how you take it, like mixed with
Yeah.
water, mixed with some, I don't know, electrolytes or juice or
Yeah, yeah.
food?
You can essentially take it any way you want. Muscle contractions will cause an increase in creatine uptake. Carbohydrates will as well, but there's a bit of caution here. The dose needed is around 75 to 100 grams of carbohydrates. Most individuals
Mm.
don't want that much. But the cool thing is you can combine creatine with protein.
Mm.
Protein is very insulinogenic and you get the benefits of protein. And there's been two studies out there showing that when creatine is added to whey protein, you get a greater increase in strength and lean body mass. So
Mm.
for me, for example, I take 5 grams with my Greek yogurt and protein mixture in the morning. And then I also drink 5 grams during my workouts. That's how I get my daily dose of 10 grams or more on a daily basis. Super convenient. And the other area, and we'll talk about myths, comes around caffeine. So there's a big thing globally. Should I put my creatine in coffee? And there's important distinctions here. The caffeine molecule and the creatine molecule don't really like each other when caffeine becomes a certain dose. And it has to do with calcium in the muscle. But the average black coffee or tea is less than 80 milligrams of caffeine. The average, even medium, is less than that. The dose of caffeine that has been shown to sort of interfere with creatine is 250 milligrams.
Mm.
So that would be a large coffee, but you'd have to do this on months and months before they interfere. So I think if you're mixing your creatine in coffee or tea, that should be fine. It seems like it's the dose of the caffeine, but not the average beverage. Yeah.
And speaking of muscle strength and power, so when I was looking at the research, then the power output appeared
Mhm.
to be like the biggest thing that you
Yes.
see from creatine, um,
Yeah.
and more
It
so than
seems
muscle mass.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And it seems to have a drive from the neuromuscular recruitment. And when it gets to strength, endurance, and power, the interesting thing is it seems to be later on in the session. So, for example, if you do 4 sets of squat or 4 sets of bench press, creatine really seems to come to the aid during sets 2, 3, and 4 when the body is naturally using energy,
Mm.
doesn't have enough time for the mitochondria to resynthesize it. So creatine supplementation speeds up the rate of recovery between sets. That allows a person to exercise quicker. And of course, obviously, lack of time is the world's barrier for exercise. So creatine might just help you get to a better workout more efficiently. Yeah.
Gotcha. So it like once in the beginning of the workout, your own body's natural creatine stores are kind of helping with
Right.
the reps, and by the end of the reps, or in your subsequent sets,
Yeah.
sets 3, 4, then you're tapping into
Yeah.
the creatine stores from the supplement, kind of.
That is 100% correct, and that's why we start to see you're expanding this energy system that's really tough and delaying, the glycolytic system or even oxidative system, so it just maintains a high energy capacity,
Mm,
allowing the individual to maybe do more reps or weight over time, and of course, that leads to improvements in body composition. Yeah, you're
mm,
100% correct. Yeah.
yeah, I actually remember one study where taking creatine resulted in fat loss as well. So
Mhm.
usually people associate it with like water retention, they look a bit more bloated or puffy,
Yeah.
but in that study they actually saw fat loss.
Yeah. Yeah, we did 2 meta-analysis, looked at everybody from 18 and above, and it clearly had the same, effects. If you combine creatine with weight training, you lose 2 things. Now they're very small, but they are reductions. You lose a little bit of absolute body, fat, about 0.5 kilograms, and about 1% body fat. So for those saying, "Oh, creatine increases body fat," we don't see any evidence of that. We see the opposite. So if you increase lean mass, decrease body fat, there may be a change on the scale or no change at all. But please note it's probably having beneficial effects. And if anything, it's driving water and other nutrients into the muscle, which is a really favorable environment. So that's sort of increasing net body water retention.
Gotcha. Yeah. What about bone density? So you mentioned that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's primarily focused on older adults, about 50 and above, and again, in combination with weight training. But this is where the dose is different. The lowest dose shown to have some bone benefits is about 8 grams, all the way up to about 12. And then you need to do training for at least a year, if not longer. There's a great group out of Brazil that showed that 1 to 3 grams of creatine a day without exercise for all the way up to 2 years had no bone benefits. And my colleague, Dr. Phil Chillibeck, has clearly shown that 8 to 10 grams, or sorry, 8 to 12 grams for 1 or 2 years of weightlifting primarily and adding in walking, it decreased the rate of bone mineral loss around the hip. But we also saw an increase in bone surface area and strength in the lower limbs as well. So, that has applications for older adults as we're more prone to falls and subsequently fracture. Maybe the older adults' bones are preserved a little bit more. So again, we don't see a lot of promise in young individuals, probably because their skeleton is healthy. But those postmenopausal females or older males, as we're losing muscle mass and introducing sarcopenia. So the bone benefits seem to be very popular or prevalent in older adults. It has not been shown to increase bone mineral density, so that's really important. It seems to just reduce the rate of loss. But if you have a history of osteoporosis or osteopenia, that might be interesting for an older adult, especially to take. Or flip it. What about the younger individuals who never care about bone? When you look in the mirror, they only see body composition. But as we can build up bone at a younger age, especially for young biological females, that might have huge applications for longevity later on in life. So that is an area of merging and more interest for sure.
Yeah, like bone density is something you want to bank up when you're young, because it's
Yes,
much easier to
absolutely.
build it and much harder to build it in your elderly years. So yeah,
Yeah,
if
it's near
creatine,
impossible. Yep,
yeah,
exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, if creatine can help you like add a little bit
Yeah.
more bone density, and the only reliable method to increase
Yes.
bone density is to lift anyway.
Yes.
You're not going to build bone density
Yep.
without lifting that much.
Right.
So creatine might add like a little bit more
A
to
and
that.
and and from an indirect way, if you have more muscle, it's pulling on the bone when you're doing activities of daily living,
Mm,
so the extra benefit of having more muscle mass, it's pulling on the bone, causing that stimuli for bone to grow, so that's very look at gymnasts, they have some of the highest bone mineral density and muscle density on the planet, and it's likely because of all the vectors to the bone and or muscle, yeah.
mm. Wow, we never thought about it that just having more muscle means that you're like carrying more weights around, every day, and that
Yeah.
stimulates the bone density
Yeah,
in your
those
daily
ligaments
activities.
and tendons are really activated when you're lifting, and
Mm,
if you have more things pulling on bone, our bone is very stubborn, but it does respond to a lot of variety of forces. Absolutely.
And another interesting area of performance creatine might help. You mentioned these endurance sports,
Yes.
so maybe you can talk about that.
Yeah, it's kinda come out of nowhere. We used to think, "Oh god, if you're an aerobic trained individual, why would you take creatine?" And then when you look at all the studies from soccer, swimming, to ice hockey, to triathlon and marathon, we started to see, yeah, there's improvements in agility, balance, and again, it is an energy component of the anaerobic system, so those sports that are intermittent or long duration, it seems to have some favorable effects. The nice cellular data comes from Ironman and marathon training, where those individuals took creatine, the loading phase, 5 days before they did the long race. And when they measured their blood after, they had a reduction in this inflammatory protein. They're called cytokines. They were elevated, but they weren't nearly as elevated compared to placebo. So it was the first lines of evidence to suggest that long duration aerobic can actually decrease incidences of inflammation or improvements in recovery there as well. So that's why now the emergence for pretty much all sporting events, if it's done correctly, can have applications. We're currently running a paper on combat and martial arts. So it's all these different type of sports, but the endurance athletes are there. We put out a big paper 2 years ago looking just like at endurance athletes. And again, we're starting to see a lot of beneficial effects for those populations for sure.
Mm. So it's mostly reducing muscle damage.
Muscle damage or inflammation, allowing that muscle because aerobic exercise is very catabolic. We don't
Right.
think resistance training is continuous enough, but if you're going out for a 40K run, you're running hours and hours. Is
Yeah.
very catabolic to your body, and therefore creatine can help in the recovery phase. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, and for the aging endurance athlete, creatine might be
Yes.
more important for the bone density benefits then and maintaining the
Way
muscle mass,
more
I
important,
agree.
especially to reduce muscle breakdown as well. Absolutely. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah.
I did notice a meta-analysis from 2023 that found that creatine supplementation resulted in a smaller increase in VO2 max than not taking creatine.
Yes.
So is there anything like related to water retention or increased muscle mass that might hinder some of the VO2 max? It was only like a 2 to 4%
Yeah. Hmm.
decrease or
Yeah.
lower than the placebo group. So it's not like a significant amount, but maybe for some sports it might be interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. Some show a benefit, some show not, and those decreases, the theory was that the mass of the person either went up and or a little bit of the water retention might have helped, but the mass of the person might have slowed them down. So that's why I'm a little cautious when we're doing with long duration aerobic individuals that you can titrate the dose up. Maybe the loading phase might be a little bit too acute. Yeah, it's really a good analogy.
Mm. Yeah, the way I do it is like, my yearly workout plan is, divided into
Right.
more lifting focus, more muscle and strength focus, and then more cardio focus.
Right.
So on
Yeah.
the cardio focus sections, I'm not taking a creatine, or I'm taking like just a maintenance dose of
Yes.
three,
Yeah.
4 grams, maybe something
Right.
like that. And if I'm focusing on the strength and muscle mass, I take the optimal dose, which for me is this 100 milligrams per kilogram, which for me is eight
Okay.
grams.
Yep. 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 Yeah, it's a very good dose. Very good. Yeah.
Yeah. So that if you take a smaller dose, you could probably, like, avoid some of the maybe
Yeah, or if
hindrance.
you wanna take the higher, the thing we haven't talked about is our lab has, 6 studies currently looking at the microdosing idea, so
Mm,
I'm interested in now looking at, like, a higher dose, but sometimes to your issue, some people say it's very tough to take 10 grams at once or 15. What if you take smaller, more frequent dosages throughout the day? Could that accumulate? So we're gonna have data within this year to say maybe 2.5 grams in the morning and 2.5 grams later on, is it equivalent to taking a 5-gram dose? And then also, does it cause any adverse effects? Or so it'll be really interesting to see this microdosing philosophy, can it be beneficial? Yeah.
mm,
Yeah.
interesting. And would you do it, like, during the loading phase as well? If you take, let's say, 20 grams, would you
Yeah.
separate it in the multiple doses?
Yeah. So if you were to do 20 grams, the idea is 4 by 5 grams spread
Mm,
throughout the day. I don't know if you could do 10 by 2 because that would be very, very tough to do. I think everybody's so busy. The key is what's practical. What can you
right.
do to allow someone to do it? But I've taken 10 grams at once. I typically take two fives at least, or a little bit more. But in some of those studies, they took to 20, 25 grams all at once, and no adverse effects. So it's up to the person subjective that way. Yeah.
Gotcha. We can move on with the brain then. So that's,
Mhm.
yeah, very interesting area of research. And what I've noticed is that what has made creatine so popular again, like this research
Yes.
about brain and cognition. So the brain obviously uses a lot of energy and has a lot of mitochondria and needs a lot of ATP.
Yes.
So I guess the same reason it supports energy production in the brain primarily.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so interesting. Our bicep gets sore, we rest it and then train other muscle groups. Unfortunately, the brain is working 24 hours a day, even when you don't want it to. So the brain's only about, 2 kilograms, but it occupies about 20% of our daily energy. And that's on a good day. When we're metabolically stressed, which is likely everybody in the world, it's working 24/7. And the interesting thing is when you look at the brain biology, it's similar to muscle with one big difference. Muscle does not make its own creatine. So it likes to act as a vacuum and take in as much as possible. The brain is very unique. It has the blood brain barrier for a very important reason, and the brain actually does synthesize creatine. So only until recently have we discovered that, yes, if you take in more dietary creatine or supplementation, it can actually get in through the blood brain barrier. It's very slow compared to muscle. The blood brain barrier only has a certain amount of doorways that allow it in. But when you do take supplementation, creatine can accumulate or raise your brain creatine levels. And that has massive implications for those with depression, anxiety, head trauma. A common denominator with all these conditions is that their brain creatine levels are reduced. So at the beginning of the podcast, we talked about how important maintaining creatine is to maintain energy. And of course, all our brain cells or brain bioenergetics rely on that as well. So the idea is the more creatine in the brain can actually function at a higher level and or during times of sleep deprivation, hypoxia, jet lag, depression, clinical anxiety, maybe it's coming to the rescue. So the whole push here is that maybe in times of metabolic stressors, creatine may come to the rescue of your normal brain, add to what's already in the brain, and sort of have the benefits. And some of the best studies show that creatine really works during mental fatiguing tasks or sleep deprivation. But that 5-gram dose for your muscle, we think is not nearly as much. Because if you're taking 5 grams, most will go to your muscle. You're going to have a little bit left trickling to the brain. And for me as an academic, I take at least 10 grams a day, and I've certainly noticed an improvement in cognition. I was recently in Germany for the creatine conference, and I took 20 grams a day leading up to it, and I certainly noticed a decrease in jet lag. So, a lot of people are starting to say that. And the other big one is we're starting to see the emergence on sleep. And a great study we put out last year showing that 5 grams a day in biological females that were working out, they actually got an increase, an additional hour of sleep on the days they worked out. And I think that is really important. I think everybody is sleep deprived, or most people I know, and most people would do anything to get more sleep. And creatine seems to decrease inflammation in the brain. It improves some of the mitochondrial health parameters, and therefore maybe the brain can recover quicker, and therefore that might help improve or explain why cognition and memory and tasks of daily living seem to be maintained even if you've been up for 21 hours of sleep deprivation in some of these studies. So it's very
Mm.
fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah, in that study where they took the creatine after 21 hours of sleep deprivation, the creatine had similar effects as caffeine. Yeah,
And that was one bolus dose. It was the first one to look at not titrating it up over time. Absolutely.
yeah. Uh, but with the brain and cognition, so there's the aspect of neurodegeneration that there's a few
Yes.
studies looking at creatine's effect on cognitive impairment in elderly people. Um, so and it showed some improvements and
Mhm.
benefits. So is it useful only in the situations where your brain is under more cognitive deficits or under sleep deprivation or some trauma, or would the person be expected to gain like even like a upscale in their cognition, even if they're like even normal with their cognition?
Yeah, of the 18 studies, about 14 have shown benefits, and some were in healthy individuals. So at the end of the day, I think creatine can cause some small beneficial effects to cognition. It seems to really work again if those are metabolically stressed. But I think of the aging population, we put out a meta-analysis, and it did improve memory there. So I think that has huge applications. Could that translate into Alzheimer's and dementia? We need big studies coming up, but I'm really encouraged with some of the pilot data that is showing there. There needs to be more research in Parkinson's and Huntington's and multiple sclerosis. So those areas are coming. But when you add creatine to traditional treatment programs with clinical depression and anxiety, it has very favorable effects there. And there's been one study in Scotland in children with concussion and head trauma, and it seemed to improve the rates of recovery there as well. And a common denominator is that the idea is that it decreases inflammation, allowing the brain to repair itself a little bit quicker. And the reason we know that is when we look at the rodent model in mice and rats, when they were forced to have a concussion, creatine before or after head trauma really seemed to decrease inflammation and improve cortical stability. Obviously, we can't do that to humans, so we use the animal model as a surrogate there, but at least it provided some mechanisms about what's happening. And that's why we think a bit higher dose for those that are playing contact sports, or if you're really metabolically stressed. That's why we think creatine should be considered. It certainly has no detrimental effects. Keep in mind, everything we've talked about here, not a single study has ever taken creatine and went the opposite way. If at the end of the day, it's cost effective, it's extremely safe, and I wonder why people won't consider it, especially if you're engaged in football, Australian rules football, rugby. Like, you're going to be hitting your head. This might help, and I don't see why someone wouldn't consider it. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, well, I think probably most rugby players are already taking creatine for the physical performance benefits.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they're
And
getting
they
that
didn't know about the benefits to the brain. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
you're getting auxiliary benefits for the brain, but, uh, would they need, like, a larger dose then because they're so physically active as well and
Yes.
burning it?
Yeah, so my thought is that if you're active, it doesn't actually require or increase the requirements. However, now if you're looking at it from a whole body perspective and you're training more often, obviously the 5 grams would be the minimal amount. I target 5 grams of 0.8 grams of protein. I think that's way too low. I think that's enough that you're not going to get any impairments. But if you're an exercising individual or you're getting older or you're sleep deprived, I think a little bit higher, and I that's why I personally take a minimum of 10 grams a day, yeah.
Mhm. Gotcha. And do you, like, cycle it, or do you just take the same dose?
Yeah. I've been taking it for, decades, so the idea with cycling is there from a muscle perspective, and we sort of talked about earlier, once your muscles get full, you can reduce that amount to really about 2 grams a day, but now weight, bone, your immune system, brain, and we're actually starting to see some benefits to the cardiovascular system. Why not take a bit more? And again, we're only talking about 10, 15 grams. For those in protein research, we're talking hundreds of grams. This is like a tablespoon
Mhm.
at the end of the day. It's very small. The safety profile is exceptional. There's been no adverse effects on the kidney, liver, blood cell count. So again, it's a very, very small amount. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, and how fast would your creatine stores deteriorate if you stop taking it?
Yeah. So if you've saturated your muscle, it takes about 4 weeks for them to come all the way back down to baseline. We think the brain preserves it a bit more. The estimate is about 5 weeks. So
Mhm.
let's say, for example, you've saturated your muscle and you're going to go to Mexico and lay on the beach for a full month. You can wait the whole month and those levels would come back to baseline. But for those that like the vacation and if you don't want to take your supplement, remember you can find creatine in red meat, white meat, and or seafood. So if you're out for dinner, and you have salmon, you're probably getting 2 to 3 extra grams in addition to what you're synthesizing. So that's a great way to maintain some of those levels even when you're on vacation. Yeah.
Mm. How much salmon, like I think, like,
Yeah.
it should be, like, more than just, like, a dish, right?
So one salmon steak would have about 1 to 2 grams. A
Mm,
red,
okay.
an 8 ounce sirloin or tenderloin would have about 3 or 4. But if you get a chance to eat more seafood, and if you do consume that, it's an easy way to help maintain a little bit extra in your diet. Yeah.
Gotcha, yeah. Yeah, I actually found that, herring is very high in
Yes. Very
creatine.
high. Yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned the safety data, so there's a lot of, fear or, worry about creatine that it's gonna
Mhm.
harm your kidneys or make your hair fall out or,
Yeah.
do a
Yeah.
lot of, problems. So,
Yeah.
yeah, maybe we can talk about, like, the safety data with the
Yeah.
kidneys specifically because, that's one of the, like, biggest, fears.
Yeah. So last month, Rick Kreider led a big group and they looked at all the studies. It took an enormous amount of work and it's open access and it's published in the Journal of International Society of Sport Nutrition. And they looked at all the data and clearly showed that creatine did not lead to any greater increases on kidney, liver, blood cell count, GI tract. There was no adverse effects. And it makes sense. We naturally are already producing this compound. So our body recognizes it, and if we don't like it, we excrete it down the toilet in something called creatinine. And I recommended dosages, even all the way up to higher dosages. Creatine has been exceptionally safe. And for those who can see me, I'm bald, but I was going bald before I took creatine. And just 2 days ago, the great group finally came out with a study that looked at creatine and hair loss, and it went all the way back to the rugby study that looked at DHT, which is a hormone. But in this study, they gave 5 grams of creatine a day for several weeks. They looked at DHT, they looked at bound and free testosterone, but they also looked at hair follicle size and number. And in these young, healthy individuals, creatine did not cause an increase in any hormone or hair follicle loss. So, for those, that is a myth. We busted two big ones. The safety profile is exceptional, and we're not seeing any evidence whatsoever that creatine leads to or does cause hair thinning or follicle loss. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, and that original study from, I think it was 2006 or something, uh, they didn't even look at hair loss.
correct.
They just saw that,
Yes.
they took the creatine, they did a loading phase,
Right.
and then the maintenance phase, and then they saw increase in DHT, but they
Right.
didn't actually look at hair loss, so
Yeah,
they kind of
exactly. And
jumped to the
everybody thought it did.
conclusion.
Yep, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah. But yeah, this new study that actually, looked at hair growth didn't see any difference between the creatine
nothing.
and placebo.
In
Would you think
young,
like
I think 18 to 40 years of age, I'd have to look at it. I haven't read the totality, but, again, it's just showing that and I've assessed over 1,000 people, and not a single person has come to me and said, "Hey, whatever you're giving me is causing my hair to thin out." But when they see me, they're like, "Oh, you're bald," and then, that other creative researcher's bald, and I
Right.
was like, "There's a lot of, genetics from mom's side that usually lead the way there." Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't noticed hair loss from creatine either. But I do see a lot of people online saying that they did see some hair loss or hair thinning. So what could that be?
We don't know. When people say that, I'm like, "What other things are you consuming? Is it aging? Is it, what there's a lot of, variables that play a role there. The DHT, is it cellular? Is it serum? There's so many factors, it's even hard to comment or extrapolate on what's causing it. But
Right.
again, when you look at some of the prominent researchers, we're all bald, so people say, "Well, obviously you're bald and a creatine research, so it must be," but that's not how correlations work. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
um, yeah, and with the kidneys, so
Mm.
it's only harmful if you have kidney impairment or kidney damage.
Yeah, at higher dosages, it can cause the kidneys to work harder. So when you take in creatine through the diet or supplementation, it gets stored in primarily our muscle. But when you metabolize it, it gets in the form of something called creatinine. And a lot of people say, "Oh, my doctor checked off that box on my requisition form. I forgot to tell him I was taking creatine, and he got really worried that it was causing my kidneys to fail." And no, what it really means is that the metabolism of the supplement caused this creatinine to go up a little bit, and if that's the case, it usually indicates that the filtration has gone down or your kidneys are not working properly. So, for anybody listening, if you're on creatine supplementation, please let your doctor know that you're taking creatine, because then they should expect the creatinine to be elevated, and it just would not cause a false positive. Yeah,
Mm. Yeah, and with creatinine, it's very responsive to exercise and muscle mass as
absolutely.
well. So if you exercise and you have more muscle
Yep.
mass,
Yes.
then that makes your creatinine levels increase as well.
Yeah, and dehydration and a high protein diet can also make your creatinine levels there. So again, make sure you tell your doctor, be honest, don't hide anything from them, because you don't want to get
Yep.
anxiety with a false positive. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and I like the cystatin C more because of that. It's
Mhm.
not affected by the muscle mass and exercise.
Correct. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, and I actually measured my kidney markers
Okay.
with between this loading phase and taking 8 grams for a few months, and I
Right.
didn't notice any like significant
Yeah.
differences in all these markers.
Yeah, and I even measure my creatinine every few years, and even at the high dose, I'm still within normal range, and I might be the most saturated person on the planet. I've been taking so much of it, yeah. So, but it may, and I'm not saying it's not going to cause, but if you do have dialysis or one kidney or any other issues there, make sure you always talk to your doctor to make sure creatine's right for you, because you could be on other types of pills, hormones or water retention pills for blood volume. So just make sure creatine is right for you, and we recommend that for any medical condition. Yeah.
Mm. You mentioned the dehydration.
Mhm.
Do you need to like drink more water when you're taking creatine to, I
Yeah.
guess, retain more water in the muscles?
Yeah. It's a technical myth that you need to, but it's always recommended because ideally you're taking creatine with exercise. So obviously having a little bit more water, not a lot, maybe 1 or 2 glasses if you want. It's not necessary, but I usually recommend it to help maintain your plasma volume. And therefore, it's a little bit easier to decrease any metabolic symptoms. But creatine is super hydrating. It does not cause muscle cramping. If anything, it super hydrates the muscle. But consuming a little bit more water is fine. The reason some people might urinate on creatine is likely just to the volume. It has nothing to do with the molecule per se. It's usually people are drinking in a little bit more water. Yeah.
Mm, gotcha. Um, I guess we can now talk about the different types of creatine. So there's a
Yeah.
lot of different types of it: creatine monohydrate, hydrochloride, and others. Which one is the better one?
Yeah, at the king of the or at the top of the mountain is always creatine monohydrate. That's simply creatine linked to water, and everything I've talked about today has been monohydrate based. Um, and the interesting thing is there's a lot of marketed forms of creatine out there, but for the viewers, there's two things you need to really wrap your head around. If it's not a form of creatine, when it gets into the blood, it's not going to get into your cells. So make sure whatever you're taking, it is creatine. And second, I would be really cautious against all these other marketed forms that say it increases bioavailability or absorption. Monohydrate is near 100%. I know it's been around for so long. A lot of people are wanting something new. I don't think you need to spend your money on something new. And also, I worry that the safety profile of all these other marketed forms and the efficacy are just not there. So why choose something that's not safe and or more effective than monohydrate? I would recommend only monohydrate. Make sure it's third party tested. The world's best is Creapure from Germany, has no impurities, has GRAS status. And I think if you're looking for a product that has Creapure in it, that's all you need to look for. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, I think it's most of the creatine comes from China, and then there's
Yeah.
Creapure. Those are
Yes.
two creatines out there only.
Yeah. Yeah. And the one from China, we've had some issues with regulation. So Creapure is from Germany. They have plants around the world. It's third party tested, has GRAS status from the FDA. The purity is near 100%. Yeah.
Mm. Okay, that's good.
Yeah.
There's something called creatinine, I think, as well, that I've heard talked about recently. I don't know if you've heard about it, but yeah, supposedly some new form of creatine.
Yeah, there's a lot of new ones. There's supposed to be a lipid soluble type of creatine, so it goes through your plasma membrane of the cell quicker. Doesn't require the transporter. The only thing that's out there is a derivative that's needed to make creatine. It's called guanidino acetate or acetic acid (GAA), and there's some really good research on the brain there as well. So, but there's not a lot out there that can be added or replace creatine monohydrate. So, for those listening, I would only back creatine monohydrate. I think that's something to consider. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the cheapest and the most researched one. So,
Cheapest and most effective and safest, so that's important, yeah.
would there be any way to enhance its effects, or is it already like perfect?
Yeah, it's pretty much perfect. I think, if you're combining it with protein, you get all those muscle potential benefits there. Exercise is great too. And the cool thing is, if you want to put creatine in your water bottle and drink it, you shouldn't notice any adverse effects. So it's one of these things that's kind of works itself. You don't have to do a lot of help with it. And the timing is irrelevant. You can take it before you go to bed, whichever it is. Yeah, it's pretty good
Mm.
there.
What about creatine gummies?
Yeah, so there is an explosion right now, and the only thing about the gummies is a very viable source, but make sure that there's actually creatine in there. I saw a couple reports on Twitter lately that there's only a few out there. I think Create is one of the only few that actually had creatine in there. There
Mm.
was 8 of 10 that were marketed on Amazon, and it showed there was nothing in there. So make sure that the product that you're spending a lot of money on actually has creatine in there as well. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, they taste
Other
good. They're like candy, and that's why kids are loving it and stuff like that. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. One thing we forgot to mention before was kind of the mood and mental
Yeah.
health benefits. So,
Yeah.
depression and mood disorders.
Yes. Yeah. So for those with clinical depression or anxiety, some really good work out of Utah and United States psychiatrists have clearly showed that creatine added to their medication, it could be SSRIs or methamphetamines or cognitive behavior therapy, seemed to improve self-efficacy. Mood was one of the biggest ones. And again, that was added to their treatment. No studies looked at creatine by itself, and I think those studies will come. But for those that are suffering from clinical depression or anxiety, make sure you talk to your psychiatrist and see if creatine is right for you. As it currently stands, we're seeing all benefits, and there's some really good review articles out there that people can go online to search for the benefits from the brain perspective, from a clinical perspective. Yeah.
Hmm. Does it interact with any other medications, any contraindications or?
Yeah, we don't see any contraindications at SSRIs or any other abnormalities, but again, the psychiatry, medical doctor in the community would know that as well. There's been a couple studies on PTSD that might have applications for veterans or first responders. So again, if it improves brain bioenergetics, start thinking of people who might respond, and it has applications for I think a lot of people to consider. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, during the sleep deprivation experiment that I did notice when I took the larger doses of creatine, there was some elevation in my mood as well. So like, I
Yeah.
don't know, a bit of a
Yep.
more,
Right.
not even like happier, but I guess more, even like quirkier or like a bit more funnier
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
better
And I
mood.
Yeah, and I think even starting out, if you wanna start with, 2 to 3, 5 grams a day, see how you feel and work your way up, and, I'm probably at the point now I'm taking about 10 grams, if not a little bit more, especially when I'm metabolically stressed, and I think 10 grams is a great average viable dose for bone, brain, muscle, and the immune system, yeah.
Gotcha. And you've been taking creatine for, several decades. So why did you start?
I've been
Or
taking it for 25 years, yep. Yeah,
yeah,
no adverse effects, and, I was
why did
going
you
bald
start?
before I
Why did you start taking it?
Yeah, I actually got involved with a great colleague of mine when I was doing my master's degree, and I noticed that a lot of people on creatine were getting bigger, stronger, faster, and I fully admit that's the main reason. And I noticed in the gym, I was like, "Wow, my recovery is a lot quicker. I can actually increase weight that I'm lifting and more repetitions." And I definitely responded well. And then you start to get in populations that really need it, like the elderly. That's been a big focal point of our research. So the goal is to try to get people to live longer, functional, free of disease, and I think creatine is one little area in a treatment program. Exercise has to be foundational. Protein is the next big thing. Make sure you're taking adequate protein, and a little bit of creatine on top of that cake, should go a long way, yeah.
Mm. Are you going to increase your dose if you get older or something, let's say in your 60s,
Uh,
70s?
Yeah, I probably will be up to about 20 grams there, and then we'll kinda have an idea about microdosing or things like that, but hopefully a big expansion, in the next 10 years on creatine and brain health or other areas, and if there is new forms of creatine out that you may not need that total amount, I'm all for evidence-based research, and again, if it's backed by science, it's safe, that's where you wanna hang your hat and look at peer-refereed publications, yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'm looking forward to
Yeah.
what's gonna happen with the research, especially in the neurodegeneration realm
Yes.
or the brain health.
100%.
That's more interesting right now
Yeah, for
because
sure.
yeah, there's already so many studies on the
Mhm.
exercise performance, and it's like undeniable
Yeah,
that it has exercise benefit.
if you could have any benefit to Parkinson's or Alzheimer's, that is a global game changer. That would have enormous magnitude of effects, yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's been great talking with you. Before I ask my last question, where can people learn more about you and your work?
Yeah, I think at Instagram, at Dr. Darren Candow is usually the easiest, is the most popular nowadays. We try to promote creatine and or other health things, so at Dr. Darren Candow on Instagram, and, that's great, yeah,
Awesome. We'll put the links in the show notes. And my last
great.
question is, what's this one piece of advice or habit that you wish you adopted sooner?
Exercise. I think exercise is the foundation of youth. And now as I get older, sleep would be a little bit better. More sleep quality is good, but I think exercise for those that are not, please move. Your body's meant to move, and no pill or powder will ever replace exercise for longevity. Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely good.
Yeah.
And if you take creatine, you get more
Yeah.
results than
Yeah.
without
You
it.
get a little bit more, hopefully. Yeah. But
Yeah,
exercise got to be there. Yeah.
yeah. Well, yeah, awesome. It was great to talk with you,
Great.
and yeah, I'll see you around.
Okay. Thank you so much.
All right, that's it for this episode. Make sure you check out my new book, The Longevity Leap, on Amazon. I'd also appreciate if you share this episode with a friend or family member. Other than that, my name is Siim. Stay tuned for the next episode. Stay empowered.